Hello, everyone. Welcome to yet another episode of Rancher Live, where we cover the latest and greatest in cloud native open source and other areas of open source, really. So, I'm Divya Mohan, and I work as a principal technology advocate at SUSE. And I also one of the things that I do is host these episodes. You might have seen my other colleague Orlin host some of them. But coming to today's session, before we begin, I feel like it's important that we set the ground rules as we do every time. First up, the special guest for today will be, coming on in a bit, but we are hosting these sessions as a way to understand and get to know more about cloud native technologies, open source, and like I said, other aspects of open sourcey stuff. So there's obviously going to be questions that pop up now and then in your minds. Please feel free to sort of add them in the chat box functionality, whether you're tuning in from YouTube, whether you're tuning in from LinkedIn or from Twitter. Second thing that you need to be mindful of is, since this is a knowledge sharing session of sorts, I'd humbly request that we be courteous to one another and be nice to one another in general during these interactions, primarily because we're all here to learn, right? So it would be very helpful to sort of interact in a meaningful and a nice way. And with that, the ground rules set of the episode is out of the way, and we can actually get to today's session. Now, I know it's really boring for everyone when I say it's a new thing that we're trying to do today, but it truly is. We've just, I think, not brought on a lot of our SUSE customers on show, and it's truly a privilege to be able to talk to some of them, right? Whether they are streaming in from at the other side of the globe, whether they're streaming in from your own country. But today's guest, I actually had the good fortune of meeting at one of the recent events that I attended in Bengaluru. It was in their campus, so I had the good fortune of meeting him there. And I'm extremely excited to bring him on because they happen to be our customer, the company Infosys. And having heard a lot about them ever since I joined the IT industry, it's very interesting for me to gain perspective on how they use our products or our open source projects, right? So um, I would love to introduce my guest, Prasun Das. He is a senior principal technology architect at Infosys, and like I said, I had the good fortune of meeting him in person at one of the events that we both happened to attend in Bengaluru. Welcome to Ranchi Live, Prasun.
Thanks, Divya. Thanks for inviting and having me here. Thank you so much.
Thank you so much for taking our time today. Primarily because I know this has been a long, long time coming, and it's been like, we've been trying to get time on each other's calendar for getting this out. So it's really nice to have you here. Do you want to introduce yourself further and give our viewers a bit more context on what is it that you do at Infosys, and how exactly, are you involved with like the things that we're going to talk about today, which is RKE2.
Yes, sure. In Infosys, I lead Cloud Native Platform Unit, which primarily focuses on building the Cloud Native platform using Kubernetes for our global clients. And of course, RKE2 is one of the distribution that we use, and I personally like it a lot. Talking about me, I've been in IT industry for last 24 years, and I have always been an open source champion since my college days. If I can say, one of my early fanboy moment was when I met Mr. Richard Stallman in Mumbai and Pune way back in 2003. He was on a short trip to India. And I came to know a lot about GNU and the open source software movement, free software movement. And since then, I've been associated with many open source projects, been working with Kubernetes for last 6 years, and seen this, grown into I would say, a phenomenal things in IT infra landscape.
Yeah, Kubernetes has grown by leaps and bounds, and it's funny that we met each other at the 10th birthday bash for Kubernetes actually earlier this year. So glad to have made your acquaintance there and have had the opportunity to bring you on here. But coming to our topic for today, which is RKE2 and how you'll leverage it at Infosys. First up, I think I ought to sort of introduce RKE2 to our viewers, primarily because I don't like to assume things and assume that people understand what RKE2 means. So RKE2 is basically an acronym for Rancher Kubernetes Engine 2. That is the thing. Now, you must be wondering, okay, but when we talk about Rancher or SUSE, aren't there already distributions like K3S and the version 1 of this? Why did we need a version 2 or the second generation of this Rancher Kubernetes engine come out, right? So to briefly explain, they all serve very different purposes, and K3S is often sort of known and accepted and like very widely known and accepted as um, something that's lightweight and it's often used in development as well because of its I as an ideal single node cluster. So the lightweightedness truly does help in development environments, and of course there's use cases in production that we've previously talked about with Sayam from Sivo on the second episode for this Rancher Life. But there are differences, and there was a necessity for a second distribution and a second generation of Rancher Kubernetes engine, primarily because RK2, in a sense, is closer to upstream Kubernetes. Even though K3S is a CNCF certified Kubernetes distribution, it deviates from upstream Kubernetes in a couple of ways. You can learn more about it in the blog that I'll link here. So RK2 sticks closer to the standard Kubernetes distribution, promoting conformance as one of the main features. It basically will run reliably in RK2, whatever runs on like vanilla Kubernetes, and essentially all the benefits that K3S offers with its lightweightedness, RK2 also sort of offers the same set of features. So you're not really not you know getting any of the perks, but the alignment with upstream Kubernetes is what is the added on feature. But I'm very curious, Prasun, what was it in the values or features of RK2 that attracted you and potentially your organization to implement RK2 in your workloads?
Okay, so I would say why I love RK2. First and foremost, it is closer to upstream Kubernetes, as you have mentioned. Second thing is its ease of deployment. So you just copy the binary and then start it like any systemd Linux services, right? So systemctl start RK2-server or RK2-agent, and your cluster is up. And you just need to take care of a single configuration file. So if you are trying to bring a Kubernetes cluster very quickly, then RK2 give you that ease of deployment. But if you look from the enterprise use cases, right, there are other things that RK2 do. What is it is hardened by default. The CIS hardening can be enabled by just a single configuration. Like there are distributions where I would say there are 200 pages documents, okay, to harden different things so that you comply to the CIS hardening. So these two key things I would say. One is the ease of deployment, and second is the hardening that RKE2 offers. By default, out of the box, and you don't need to go through those documents and check it. Of course, you can do it, but this is the two things because of which we really like RKE2.
Yeah, and I think that sort of resonates with what I've been hearing about the distribution when I chat with other customers as well at conferences and other avenues. But again, when we talk about any new Kubernetes distribution, right? Um, RK2, like I said, is yet another Kubernetes distribution on the CNCF landscape. And like we mentioned before, it's closer to upstream Kubernetes, and it's slightly different from K3s. So, what does the RK2 curve look like? Now, for me personally, it was pretty much easy because I had like a lot of internal support while learning RK2 after K3s and K3D, but uh, essentially noticing the skill gap and trying to bridge that skill gap is what we try to do as the community team at SUSA. And we've actually released an RK2 basics course that we've created with the help of the subject matter experts, back in the engineering team. So that's available on Rancher Academy, and you should see a link in the description section after the live gets over, and in the comments section on LinkedIn, if you're tuning in from that side of the social media platform.
I think we lost Divya for a minute.
That's completely my fault. I actually have very inclement weather here on account of heavy rains, and I've just about switched my internet source. So hopefully that won't happen again. I am not sure how much of it was captured previously, but I was talking about my RKE2 journey, and suddenly the whole thing went back. But I'm curious, Prasun, since this is about you and Infosys, how was your RK2 journey like? What was your learning curve when you started out with RK2?
So as I mentioned, right, installing RKE2 is fairly easy. It just needs to fill up a single configuration file and copy the binaries and start it. One of the things that I must say to everyone who is familiar with the upstream Kubernetes, once you do that, you do not see a container D, which is RK2's runtime, and the kubelet to run as a Linux daemon process. So there, if you do a systemctl status container D or systemctl status kubelet, you won't find them, right? So that is the first difference you will see. So what you should do is you will do a ps minus ef and try to grab those processes, and you will see those are running, because in RKE2 the kubelet and container D are basically managed by the RKE2 supervisory process, which is the RKE2 hyphen server. So as long as RKE2 hyphen server is running, it makes sure the container D and kubelet is running. And from a perspective of building any Kubernetes cluster, it is fairly the same, right? You have the container runtime kubelet, and post that you build the etcd clusters, you generate all the keys and certificates, and then you bring up the API servers, and then you bring up the scheduler and control manager, right? One of the good thing about RKE2 is if you look into its journal-CTL outputs, you can actually see how it does it. So if you are familiar with upstream Kubernetes, you will fairly easily understand that how this RKE2 is bringing up your Kubernetes cluster, because the journal-CTL will give you the each of this step, right? You will see the process is waiting for the etcd cluster to up, and then the process is waiting for the API server to be up, and then you will see all of your cluster is doing. So that way RKE2 is fairly close to the upstream Kubernetes. The only difference that, as I mentioned, you will see that kubelet and containerd does not run as a separate daemon process, but it, of course, it runs, right, as a process, and it is managed by the RKE2 server. And you should read through the RKE2 docs. It has a good architecture document. It has actually been enhanced a lot since we have started, right? Our RKE2 journey is about 3 years, and I'm happy to see that some of this documentation has actually put a lot of other things also. Yeah. So
And any tips and tricks that you can offer with respect to installation and anything else, anything that you can share from your experience? Because I think any end users who are trying to implement it or anything, they'd find your tips and tricks, especially with respect to the learning curve, right? Because when you have it in production, when you have it all set up and ready, that's another case. But when you're talking about getting started, a lot of people rely on the docs alone or just a course. Like I created a course for Rancher Academy for RK2 basics. That's another thing. But always lived experience is better. So can you share some tips and tricks around your onboarding journey?
yeah, sure. So as I said, right, initially we used to also struggle sometime that the cluster does not come up. So it is fairly easy to install, but there will be times when it will not exactly work as it is, not because of the RK2, maybe because of the environment or because of something, right? So the first and foremost thing I think is to understand how the RK2 works. And in the RKE2 docs section, there is an architecture document which explains, how the RKE2 distribution has been built. And of course, you can look into the GitHub and see the codes. But in general, right, what you can do is you can look into the journal.ctl log every time RKE2 server starts, right? And it fairly, tells you what exactly happens in the distribution. And it is also a container runtime, so all your CRI/CTL command works pretty well. You should also know where to look into for your kubelet logs and your container logs. So the things that I'll suggest is please read through the be happy that your cluster has come up like a magic, right? At the same time, please spend time into reading those lines of journal.ctl logs, and you will be easily able to relate to what has been written on the architecture page of the RKE2 docs, and also be familiar with simple container commands and checking the kubelet logs, and that would help you to solve a lot of these problems. And of course, RKE2 has two processes of providing the images. One is tarball method, where you can copy all the images in a tarball, and other is pulling it from your registry, right? Maybe private registry or whatever, right? And you can actually some of the problems may be associated with this, but yeah, I think RK2 works like a magic. But if you want to run it seriously in production, you should know what goes behind the magic.
I think that's very sane advice, Prasun. Primarily because having been in production support previously, knowing the architecture of the thing that you're working with, and knowing the nuts and bolts behind the technology that you're working with will always hold you in good stead, whether you're talking about open source software or even the software that you are supposed to maintain as a support personnel. So I think you're bang on with the advice bit. Now I think it's also very important to discuss upgrades, because Kubernetes, as we all know, has multiple releases every year, and it's extremely tough to keep up. The RKE2 and K3S team, and all of our other teams actually do a fairly good job of keeping y'all updated with the releases. But when we are upgrading RKE2 clusters, there are two ways to do it. You have the manual upgrade, and you have the automatic upgrade, and of course you can read more about each of these upgrades in our docs. But to summarize it, manual upgrades uses installation script by manually installing the binary of the desired version, or uses RPM upgrades in case you're choosing an RPM installation in the very first place. Automatic upgrades are basically using the system upgrade controller, and it's more of a Kubernetes native approach, right? Wherein you use a CRD, a plan, and a controller that schedules updates based on the configured plans. So at Infosys, I'm not sure how y'all do it. Prasun, can y'all shed light? Because I'm sure over the 3 years that y'all have been sort of using RKE2, or maybe even lesser, I don't know. You said 3 years is why I'm quoting it, but um, over the 3 years or over the years that you've used RKE2, there would have been upgrades. I'm sure you're not stuck at Kubernetes 1.1x. So, how is it that you all schedule upgrades, and how is it that you go about with the upgrade process? Is it simple? Is it complex? Could you share your experience?
Yes, sure. So we started with 1.21 and now we are at 1.29 of the Kubernetes. So one of the another interesting thing I like about RK2 version is their versioning is same like upstream Kubernetes, right? So it just have a prefix of RK2, R2 or R1 depending upon what you are using. So we have done a lot of upgrades, seven to eight upgrades in clusters, right? So automatic upgrade is a great tool, and I think it can does things at scale. But again, I will tell that when you are testing and validating everything, you must do it through a manual upgrade, primarily because it helps you to understand how the upgrade process works. Now again, as I said, RK2 starting is just copying a binary and starting it. An upgrade is also very simple, right? It is like stopping the process, replacing that binary and starting the new binary. Now again, when you start the new binaries, the same way the new cluster is built, right? The new of this comes, and of course the Kubernetes versions queue policy, which mandates versions queue between the API server. You need to follow that while doing the upgrade of a especially your in place upgrades, right? But there are a couple of more things that I would like to add. One is that I talked about how do you understand from the journal CTL logs how the RK2 cluster comes up. But once the cluster comes up, right, you need to install a lot of other things. Say for example, of course you need to install the DNS, the networking component, and many other system charts, right? So RK2 does it using a Helm controller. So the Helm controller actually runs again when you do the upgrades. So because you are doing upgrade one by one, so your newer master has a new version of the Helm controller, so you should allow the time to run it. Okay, so there are two ways. Now recently we have actually setting up a parameter where Helm controller is not putting the newer charts till I complete all the master upgrade. Okay, you can do it. But even if you want to upgrade the master, one of the key thing that you have to do, and I personally raised a bug on that also, and there was an RKE2 engineers worked with us and pointed us out, right, that you should allow enough time between the multi-master upgrade, so that chart gets time to do that. Second is, it is very important to understand the CRDs through which you can actually see the charts, right? So if you do a Helm ls minus n cube system, right, and I think maybe mm, do a Helm ls minus n cube system, you can actually see the Helm versions that is run on that. This is something is not there in the RKE2 docs as far as I remember, maybe included now, but everyone can do a Helm ls minus n cube system and see the Kubernetes versions that has been done, and it is done through a Helm controller, and the Helm controller actually uses the Helm chart and Helm chart config. So Helm chart is basically your Helm chart, and the Helm chart config works like a values file of a Helm chart, right? So the tricks with which the RKE to deploy the system charts, right, it is very important to understand, because the problem of upgrade most likely will not come from the RKE2 version. They fairly are tested very well. They will work like magic again. But you might face a problem in terms of the components that you are using, right? Say for example, you are using Calico as a CNI, and you might run into a problem there. Or you are running a cloud provider integrations, right? Be with a public cloud provider or a vSphere or OpenStack, right? You might face a problem there, right? So all those system charts are basically deployed through the Helm controller. And this is one of the things that we have faced, I think, fair 2 years back, probably. We were doing an upgrade on a Friday, and what we saw is, sort of our CNI is messed up. Now, when a CNI messed up, what would you do, right? The typical thing you will do is you will install and run it one more time, right? But then it may not install the CNI itself. So if you know this Helm chart and Helm config, right? So if you just put a dummy Helm chart config file, or you get Helm chart config or Helm chart get updated, the corresponding chart get automatically deployed. So basically, if you want, your upgrade is done, and if you want to basically run another system chart again, right, all you probably need to do is to create a Helm chart config file for that. Say you want to run Calico again, so just create or change something in the Helm chart config file of the Calico, and which will trigger an Helm deployment again. So I think this is one of the area when you start doing RKE2, you may not put a lot of focus. But I would strongly recommend, right, if you go into the upgrade, do a manual upgrade. Please understand how this system charts get updated. Once you validated, tested everything, yeah, of course, you go through that automatic upgrade tools. It's a great tool. It will saves a lot of your efforts. But if you run into a problem, if you are clear about how this is managed, right, then it would be good. And Divya, if I can extend this further for a minute, I also want to take this opportunity. I also want to take the opportunity to everyone to see how the any Kubernetes distribution works, right? There are two things that Kubernetes distribution basically automate. One is bringing the basic cluster, like bootstrapping the cluster, which is setting up the container D, setting up kubelet, and bringing all these etc database, API, kube controller, kube scheduler up. The next thing that everybody does, right, and as I see in RKE2, this is done by RKE2 supervisory process. The next thing that comes is getting all your other components up, your networking up, your DNS up, your ingress up, right, your cloud provider integration up. Now every distribution has a different approach of automating it. So in RKE2, this is done by a Helm controller which deploys the system charts. And these system charts are, basically also stored as a 2CRD, Helm chart and Helm chart config. So I will recommend that, please explore that part also. And I think it would also give you a lot of insight into, what does a Kubernetes distribution do? How does it make your life easier? Compared to a plain vanilla installation where you do everything one by one by yourself.
Yeah, thank you so much for all of that, Prasoon. And I think we're up for time almost. So, any parting advice for our viewers today on how they could best use RKE2? I know you've given them a lot of gems already scattered across this, session. But do you have any further advice?
Yes. So what advices that I would say that most of the cases that we are seeing, from our perspective, the Kubernetes is currently deployed at scale. We have crossed that limit where Kubernetes is used to be used by a small set of applications, by certain applications. Everywhere Kubernetes is getting deployed at scale. So, and when you deploy Kubernetes at scale, you need to take care of a lot of things, right? And one of them is security and policy compliance and hardening. So if you are using RKE2, and of course, I'll assume that many of you are using RKE2, please do use the default hardening features of RKE2. Please also use the policy enforcement part of it, which comes through combination of Rancher and RKE2 together. I think that would help you a lot. And of course, a lot of these people's does stay with the same version for a long time and then really do a blue green deployment and then move from one version of the Kubernetes cluster and jumps two or three together. Our experience and my recommendations will be that in RKE2, because Kubernetes cluster upgrade has been really made easy, please be on par with the latest version as far as possible, because that would give you a lot of features. For example, we had some of the requirement regarding stateful set, the features regarding the understanding the volumes, or many of these, right, that we have seen that constantly Kubernetes community is working on, right? Kubernetes community is introducing a lot of features. So if you continuously upgrade your clusters, and you can take the benefit of all these newer features, and because this is hassle free, right? So I would recommend please understand the distribution in depth, see how it works under the hood, and then make sure that you do a regular upgrade so that you take advantage of all the latest and greatest features that the community is bringing to us in every releases.
And like I said, you've been very generous with advice today. So I think our audience has a lot to take away from this session. So thank you so much, Prasoon, for stepping up today and agreeing to be on this episode. I know there were a few interruptions from my side, but that's because of the inclement weather. Nothing in my control at this point, but. Thank you so much to our audience for bearing with that, and thank you so much, Prasoon, for taking our time. If you'd like to learn more about RK2, please visit our docs. You can navigate to docs.rk2.io, and check out the docs. But there's also the RK2 basics course on Rancher Academy that y'all can get started with. It's basically going to introduce the very fundamental concepts of RK2, nothing too deep, and then you can sort of build upon that knowledge after you start tinkering with it locally. But that's it from me and I think Prasoon for today. So thank you so much once again, Prasoon.
It's a
It
pleasure
was
talking
lovely
to you.
chatting with It was a pleasure
It's a
talking
pleasure
to you,
talking
and
to
I
you.
hope to bump into you at one of the other events soon. Thank you so much, and have a great day slash afternoon slash eve, everyone. Bye.
Thank you. Bye.